My name is Laura Bennett. I am 32 years old, and for most of my marriage, I believed silence was safer than truth. That belief shattered one evening at my in-laws' dinner table. My husband said, "I sold your little cabin for $60,000. His words cut through the room like a knife. I blinked, certain I had misheard, but then his mother clapped his father, laughed his sister, raised her glass. They were all cheering. Owen leaned back with smug triumph, savoring my shock. He lifted his glass toward me. "The money for this dinner, it's from the cabin sale. At least one meal is covered." Laughter erupted, bouncing off crystal and china. That cabin wasn't just property. It was the place I had built for myself, with 7 years of careful saving as a teacher. It was my only escape from his temper, from their constant judgment, a refuge, tucked into the Vermont woods where I could breathe without fear. And now he flaunted its loss like a victory. I steadied my breath, my hands trembling against the table's edge. "No," I said, my voice low but sharp. "That cabin is mine. I never signed anything. I refuse to accept this." The laughter died. Chairs shifted. All eyes turned to me. Owen's smirk collapsed into fury. He shoved his chair back, the scrape against the floor loud as thunder. "You refuse?" His voice was venom. "You dare defy me, here in front of my family." His hand shot out before I could brace. The slap exploded across my cheek, loud, brutal. My head snapped fire, blazing across my skin, the metallic taste of blood rising in my mouth. The table gasped, but not for me. His mother's voice was cold. "Laura, don't provoke him. You know how stubborn you can be." His father shook his head. "Sit down. Stop shaming this family." Their eyes held no pity, only blame. Humiliation burned deeper than the sting on my face. I gripped the table, refusing to crumble. They thought the slap silenced me. They thought I would bow my head as always. But beneath the table, my phone vibrated. Hours earlier, I had sent every forged document, every fraudulent paper to Leah, my friend, my attorney. Her reply now glowed against the screen agents outside. "Ready." A pounding knock rattled the front door. Everyone froze. The knock came again, louder, authoritative. Owen sneered, still puffed up from striking me. He strode across the room, yanked the door open. Floodlights from black SUVs poured into the entryway. 2 men in dark suits stood, badges gleaming. Owen Bennett, the taller agent, said, voice steady and final, "You are under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, and the unlawful sale of federally protected property." Chaos erupted. His mother shrieked. His sister dropped her glass. His father stammered, color draining from his face. Owen's jaw dropped, fury flashing to panic. "This is a mistake," he sputtered, but the agent had already spun him around, cuffs snapping shut. As they dragged him out, Owen's eyes locked on me, filled with rage and disbelief. I said nothing. Blood dried at the corner of my lip, my cheek swollen, but my silence was louder than any defense. The door slammed behind them, the night swallowing his shouts. For the first time in years, the room was silent. Not with judgment, but with fear. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of justice shift onto my side. On the surface, my life looked like the picture of stability. I was 32, married to Owen Bennett, a man everyone in our town described as charming and ambitious. We had a 2-story home in the suburbs with a neatly trimmed lawn matching SUVs in the driveway and invitations to his parents' Friday night dinners that no one ever dared decline. People assumed we were perfect, the kind of couple who had it all figured out. But perfection was only a facade, and facades always crack. Owen loved to perform in public. He shook hands too hard, laughed too loudly, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who thought the world owed him recognition. At church on Sundays, he clasped my shoulder and smiled for the congregation, a picture of marital pride. At business mixers, he introduced me as my lovely wife, a teacher in a tone that carried more condescension than affection. Behind closed doors, his smile disappeared. The man the world admired became sharp, controlling, impossible to please. Gaslighting was his favorite weapon. If I mentioned the hours I spent preparing lesson plans, he would scoff. "You only teach high school, Laura. That's not real work." When I told him I had been chosen to lead the English department at my school, he laughed at my excitement. "Big deal. It's a title, not money. You should be grateful I handle the finances." If I tried to argue, he would lean close his eyes, narrowing his voice, dropping to a hiss. "You're dramatic. You twist everything I say. Don't make me out to be the villain." The pressure was constant, like a weight pressing against my chest. His parents reinforced it at every family dinner. If Owen interrupted me, they chuckled. If he mocked me, they nodded in agreement. If I grew quiet, they filled the silence with warnings. "Don't nag him, Laura," his mother would say, folding her napkin with surgical precision. "Men need peace, not complaints." His father added, "A good wife knows when to stay silent." Each remark chipped away at me, leaving me smaller, quieter, until I almost forgot the sound of my own conviction. But I wasn't blind. I saw the pattern of control woven into everything he did. The way he monitored my credit card statements. The way he dismissed my friendships, labeling Leah, my closest friend since college, a bad influence. The way he sneered when I said I wanted a weekend to myself. He made me feel like asking for space was betrayal. And yet, in those moments of suffocating doubt, I found my resolve hardening. I knew I couldn't argue him into seeing me. I couldn't appeal to his parents for fairness. The only way to survive was to cultivate silence, to let him believe I was submissive. While inside I guarded the small fragments of independence he hadn't yet taken. It was in that silence that the idea of the cabin took root. When I was 25, fresh out of graduate school, and before the marriage had sunk its claws fully into me, I opened a separate account. At first, it was tiny, $50 here, $100 there scraped from tutoring sessions and summer jobs. Over time, it grew. I never told Owen, never left a trace. That account became my lifeline. Years later, when I found a cabin in Vermont listed by an elderly couple who simply wanted it cared for, I signed the papers in my name alone. To Owen, it was a silly little place. To me, it was proof that I could still exist outside of him. But appearances mattered more to Owen than reality. In his world, we were the happy suburban couple with everything in place. In mine, I was a woman biding her time, holding on to one piece of freedom in a marriage built on control. The contrast between the image and the truth was the prison I lived in, and I knew one day the bars would snap. Control never announces itself with a single thunderclap. It arrives drip by drip like water, seeping into the foundation of a house until the wood rots. With Owen, the pattern of abuse began quietly enough that even I mistook it for normal marriage friction. But once I recognized it, the rhythm was impossible to unsee. The first time he raised his voice so sharply that the neighbors called the police, I was 28. We had been arguing about my car, an old Honda Civic I insisted on keeping. He wanted me to trade it in for something respectable. When I said no, his rage spilled over. Plates crashed in the sink, a chair toppled. His voice cracked like a whip against the walls. By the time the officer knocked at our door, Owen was smiling again, his hand firm on my shoulder. "Just a little disagreement," he explained, and the officer, seeing a well-dressed man with a steady smile, nodded and left. Later that night, Owen pressed his fingers into my arm, hard enough to leave bruises. "You embarrassed me," he hissed. "Never do it again." The pattern only deepened. If I stayed late at school, grading papers, he accused me of neglecting him. If I came home too quickly, he said I hovered. He checked my phone under the guise of keeping our marriage transparent. Once when I objected, he slammed the device onto the counter so hard the screen cracked, then shoved it back into my hands. Nothing to hide, right? His eyes glittered with a kind of cruel satisfaction. His parents excused every outburst. At dinners, if I tried to speak about my work or mention my students, Owen would cut me off, joke about how little teachers made, and his mother would laugh. "He's only teasing, Laura. Don't be so sensitive." When I once gathered the courage to say I felt disrespected, his father fixed me with a steely gaze. "Our son carries pressure you'll never understand. Be grateful he provides." The message was clear. His anger was my burden to bear. But there were moments when the mask slipped in ways that left no doubt. One winter evening, when I refused to sign over part of my savings for his latest business venture, he backed me against the refrigerator, his breath hot and sharp with whiskey. His fist slammed the door beside my head, the metal rattling. "Don't test me, Laura." He growled, his eyes so close I could see the burst blood vessels threaded in red. I stood frozen, the hum of the refrigerator loud in my ears, until finally he pulled away, muttering that I made him act this way. Another time he threw my lesson plans across the living room papers, fluttering like wounded birds. "You care more about these kids than your husband," he shouted. When I bent to gather them, he kicked one folder aside, sneering. "What will a teacher's salary ever build anyway?" That night, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until dawn, vowing silently that I would never let him take from me the one piece of independence. I had managed to build the cabin. The cabin became my quiet resistance. I drove there alone when the walls of our house felt too close, when my skin still tingled from where his fingers had gripped too tightly. In the stillness of the Vermont woods, I could hear myself again. I journaled every incident, every bruise, every word. I photographed the marks he left, saved the shattered screen of my phone, tucked them away in a locked drawer at the cabin. I wasn't ready to leave yet. I didn't know how, but I was preparing. What made the pattern unbearable was not just the violence of his hand, but the violence of their voices. His family never raised a fist, but their gaslighting was its own cage. They minimized, dismissed, turned every confrontation into my fault. Each time they excused him, they deepened his power. And each time they did, a new layer of steel formed in me, silent but certain. I began to see the truth clearly. Owen's anger wasn't accidental, and it wasn't mine to fix. It was a cycle, and his family was the wheel that kept it turning. If I stayed silent forever, they would crush me. Under it, if I wanted freedom, I would need more than silence. I would need proof, timing, and patience. I didn't know then that the slap at the dinner table would become the moment the cycle broke. But I did know one thing: every scar, every bruise, every journal entry was leading me somewhere. Somewhere beyond his reach. Somewhere he could not control. When I think about the cabin, I think about freedom, not luxury, not investment, but freedom carved out of a life that was choking me. I bought it when I was 29, long before Owen knew I had been saving behind his back. It wasn't a palace in the mountains or some sprawling estate. It was a modest log cabin in Vermont, perched on the edge of a lake, where the trees bent low to kiss the water, and the fog rolled in like a soft blanket each morning. For most people, it might have looked simple, even unremarkable. For me, it was a fortress. I still remember the day I signed the deed. I had been squirreling away money for years, tutoring after school, teaching summer classes, selling old furniture online, even writing anonymous freelance essays at night when Owen was out drinking with his friends. Every dollar that didn't touch our shared accounts went into a savings account in my name only. It grew slowly, like a secret tree no one else could see, until one day it was enough. The elderly couple who owned the cabin had raised their children there, but were moving to Florida to retire. They cared less about the price than the promise that someone would love it as they had. When I told them I was a teacher looking for a quiet place to rest, the husband smiled, handed me the keys, and said, "Then this home will serve you well." The first night I stayed there alone, I slept on the wooden floor with nothing but a borrowed blanket and a lantern. Outside, crickets hummed, the lake rippled against the rocks, and I felt for the first time in years that I could breathe without waiting for a door to slam or a voice to cut me down. I wrote in my journal until my hand cramped, every line a reminder that I still had thoughts, dreams, and a voice that belonged to me alone. Of course, I couldn't keep it a secret forever. Owen noticed when I began driving out of town on weekends, returning with the smell of smoke in my hair and calm in my eyes. At first, he dismissed it as your little hobby house. When he finally visited, he walked around the cabin with a curl of his lip poking at the old wooden beams, criticizing the lack of granite countertops and declaring, "It's just a shack in the woods, worthless." I said nothing, but inside I smiled. Worthless to him meant priceless to me, but Owen wasn't a man who could tolerate anything outside of his control. Soon his ridicule turned sharper. Why waste time here when we could use the money for a real investment? His parents joined the chorus. At Sunday dinner, his mother sniffed Laura. "It's selfish to hide money away in that place when Owen is working so hard." His father folded his arms and added, "A marriage means shared assets. If you're keeping things separate, what does that say about you?" They didn't ask why I needed the cabin. They didn't ask why silence had become my only refuge. To them, my independence was an offense. Still, I clung to it. I spent nights there grading papers by the fire, mornings sipping coffee, as deer stepped softly across the clearing afternoons, writing down every incident of Owen's temper in a leather journal I hid beneath the floorboards. The cabin was more than shelter, it was a record keeper, a witness to the truth of my life. What Owen and his family never understood was that the cabin wasn't an indulgence. It was survival. It was the place where I reminded myself that the world was bigger than their dining table, their judgments, their constant erosion of my worth. And though they mocked it, though they dismissed it as a frivolous waste, I knew that someday, somehow this cabin would save me. I couldn't have imagined then how right I would be, or how their contempt for that cabin would trigger their downfall. It began with a slip, a small oversight that Owen never intended me to notice. One Saturday afternoon, I was sorting through the mail when I saw an envelope from a title company addressed to him. Normally, he was meticulous about hiding anything he didn't want me to see, but this one had landed in my pile by mistake. My name wasn't on it yet. Something in me told me to open it. My hands shook as I unfolded the document inside. It was a copy of a property transfer agreement. My cabin, my name had been scratched into signatures I had never written, dates I had never touched. Beside them, Owen's bold, jagged signature, sprawled with arrogant finality. The price, $60,000, stared back at me like a slap in ink. My throat closed. The cabin was worth more than 4 times that amount, but the number wasn't what made my knees weak. It was the knowledge that he had stolen my independence, erased my existence from the deed with the stroke of a pen. I clutched the paper so tightly the edges cut into my skin. I confronted him that evening, my voice trembling but determined. "Owen, what is this?" I slammed the document onto the kitchen counter. He barely glanced at it. Before sneering, "It's business. I closed the deal. You should thank me. Now that shack won't bleed us dry. I never agreed. I never signed anything," I said, my voice rising despite my racing heart. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. "You don't own anything without me. You think because your name is on a piece of paper, it makes you powerful. Don't be naive, Laura. I run this marriage. I decide what stays and what goes." I stumbled back, clutching the counter for balance. "You forged my signature. That's illegal. That's marriage," he cut me off. His eyes cold. "You're mine. So is everything you think you own." The conversation should have ended there, but Owen couldn't resist parading his triumph. By Sunday dinner, he had turned the entire family into his jury. "Laura doesn't appreciate what I've done," he announced between bites of roast beef. "I finally got rid of that ridiculous cabin. 60,000 cash. Smartest move I've made all year." His mother set down her wine glass, nodding approvingly. "Good for you, Owen. That place was a waste." "Laura, you should be proud he takes charge." Proud. The word tasted like poison. I sat silent as they turned the betrayal into a celebration. His sister chimed in. "Now you two can focus on building real wealth together." His father added, "Laura, learn from this. A man's job is to lead. A wife's job is to support." My skin crawled. The forged papers burned in my purse like a live coal. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell them all that they were accomplices to theft. But their eyes dared me to speak, dared me to defy the narrative they had already agreed upon. So I didn't scream. I observed. I memorized every smug expression, every dismissive chuckle. And that night, when I was alone, I scanned the documents and sent them to Leah. Leah didn't laugh. She didn't tell me I was overreacting. She called me immediately, her voice sharp with alarm. "Laura, this isn't just fraud, it's federal. That cabin sits inside a federally monitored zone because of its proximity to restricted land. Forgery plus unlawful sale of protected property equals wire fraud. This isn't just him stealing from you. This is prison time." I pressed my hand to my chest, the weight of her words pressing back. For the first time, Owen's arrogance had opened a crack wide enough for justice to walk through. I knew then that I couldn't stop the sale. The ink was already forged, the deal already struck. But I could stop him. I could turn his betrayal into the very rope that would drag him down. The night Leah called me, I sat in the cabin with only the crackle of the fireplace for company. The document she had analyzed was spread across my lap, the inked forgery glaring at me like a wound. My cheek still throbbed faintly from Owen's last outburst, a reminder of the danger I lived with daily. But Leah's voice had carried something I hadn't felt in years' certainty. "Laura, this is federal wire fraud. If you play this right, he won't just face divorce papers, he'll face handcuffs." I clutched the phone tighter. But if I confront him, he'll destroy the evidence. He'll deny everything. "Then don't confront him yet," Leah said firmly. "Document, preserve, and stay silent. Let him think he's already won." That's when men like Owen get sloppy. Silence. It had always been my prison, but now Leah was showing me how to turn it into a weapon. Over the next week, I built my arsenal quietly. At school between classes, I printed copies of the forged documents and stored them in separate envelopes, one in my desk, one in a locked drawer at the cabin, one with Leah. I photographed every bruise Owen had left, every threatening text he had sent when I failed to answer his calls quickly enough. I even recorded snippets of conversations on my phone, capturing his voice, admitting that everything you own is mine, and I decide what stays and what goes. At home, I let him believe his control was absolute. When he strutted through the door, boasting about the money from the cabin sale, I nodded faintly as if resigned. When his mother cornered me in the kitchen to lecture me about gratitude, I bit my tongue and let her words wash over me. I gave them what they wanted to see: submission. Inside, though a storm was gathering, I learned to read Owen's rhythms, to predict his tempers. When his voice rose, I lowered mine. When he demanded obedience, I gave just enough to keep him unsuspecting. But every quiet moment, every nod, every swallowed word was part of a larger plan. Leah checked in daily. "We'll need a trigger," she explained. "A moment to bring this out in the open. Somewhere public where he can't twist the narrative, where the evidence can land hardest." I knew exactly when that would be. The Bennett's Friday family dinner, a ritual Owen never skipped a stage, where he played the role of victorious provider while I was cast as the silent wife. It would be the perfect theater for his downfall. All week I rehearsed my role. I let him believe I was defeated. When he waved receipts under my nose, boasting about the deal, I smiled faintly. When he mocked me for clinging to a pile of wood in Vermont, I said nothing. And when he finally announced that he would be showing off his victory at the next dinner inviting extended family to toast his brilliance. I nodded. He thought I was broken. He thought my silence meant surrender. What he didn't know was that Leah had already alerted federal investigators. The cabin's proximity to restricted land made it more than property. It was a matter of national jurisdiction, and Owen's arrogance, his forged signature, his false wire transfers, had lit up every red flag. The FBI was watching. On Friday morning, Leah sent me one last message. "Stay calm. They'll be ready tonight." I closed my phone, pressed a hand to my chest, and breathed. For years, silence had been the cage that trapped me. Tonight, silence would be the key that opened the door. When I looked at my reflection in the mirror before leaving for dinner, I saw the bruise fading along my jawline, a shadow of pain I refused to hide with makeup. Let them see, let them witness. I was ready to sit at that table, to endure their laughter one last time, because I knew the knock at the door would not be for me. This time it would be for him. The dining room was drenched in golden light from the chandelier. The long oak table covered in roasted meats, polished silver, and bottles of wine, breathing deep in crystal decanters. It was the kind of setting that should have promised warmth, but all I felt was a steady knot tightening in my stomach. Friday dinner at the Bennetts was never just a meal. It was theater with Owen as the star and me cast as the silent prop. That night, though, I wasn't just the audience. I was waiting for the final act. Owen was in rare form. He had arrived early with his chest puffed, his voice booming as he regaled his parents with half-truths about his business victories. He strutted around the table, poured drinks with exaggerated flourishes, kissed his mother's cheek as though he were a devoted son instead of a forger. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, my cheek still tender from the last time he lost his temper. When dinner was served, he made his move. Raising his glass, he tapped the rim with his fork, commanding attention like a man about to deliver a wedding toast. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his grin sharp and predatory. "I've done what no one thought Laura could manage. I sold her little cabin." He let the pause hang, savoring the weight of the words. $60,000. Gosh! Applause burst around the table. His sister beamed. His father clapped him on the shoulder. His mother laughed so hard she wiped at her eyes. Finally, she said, "You've put an end to that nonsense shack in the woods." I sat frozen, the words slicing through me. Owen turned to me, eyes glittering with malice. "And tonight," he added, "this feast is on me, paid for with that very money. At least the cabin is good for something." Laughter roared again, each note pressing down on my chest. I gripped my fork so tightly the metal dug into my palm. My throat burned. My voice came out steadier than I expected, though low enough that the table had to strain to hear. No, that cabin was mine. I never agreed. I never signed. I refused to accept this. The laughter stuttered to a halt. Silence swelled like a storm cloud. Owen's smirk shattered his face, hardening as he leaned forward, eyes narrowing into slits. "You refuse," he repeated, his voice dripping venom. I held his gaze. Yes. The chair screeched across the floor as he shot to his feet. "You dare humiliate me, here in front of my family." He loomed above me, and before I could move his hand struck. The slap cracked through the dining room like a gunshot. My head snapped to the side, my cheek exploding in fire, the copper taste of blood blooming across my tongue. Gasps rippled around the table, but sympathy did not follow. His mother shook her head. "Laura, you know how you provoke him." "Stop." His father's voice was cold steel. "Enough theatrics. Sit down and show respect." The humiliation burned deeper than the pain. My skin throbbed, but I forced my chin up, forced myself not to cry. I would not break. Not here. As Maung. Owen stood over me, chest heaving triumphant in his violence. He thought the slap had ended the argument, that his family's approval had sealed my silence forever. He didn't see the faint glow from my phone beneath the table, the message from Leah that had arrived minutes earlier. "Agents outside, ready." I straightened in my chair, my voice calm, though my lip bled. "This isn't finished, Owen." He sneered, his hand still tingling from the blow. "It's already finished. You're nothing without me." At that moment, a heavy knock shook the front door. Every head turned. The knock came again, louder, more commanding. Owen stiffened, then puffed his chest and strode toward the entryway, muttering about nosy neighbors. The family exchanged puzzled glances, but I knew. My pulse steadied. My silence had carried me to this moment. When Owen yanked open the door, the floodlights of black SUVs spilled across the threshold. 2 federal agents stood tall, badges gleaming, voices firm. "Owen Bennett once said you are under arrest for wire fraud forgery and the unlawful sale of federally protected property." Chaos erupted. His mother screamed. His sister dropped her fork. His father's face went pale. And Owen, the man who had just struck me into silence, suddenly had none of his own left to give. The silence after the knock was heavier than the chandelier above us. Owen turned from the doorway, his face frozen somewhere between fury and disbelief. The agents stepped inside without hesitation, their black jackets marked in yellow letters that left no room for doubt. "Owen Bennett, you are under arrest for wire fraud forgery and the unlawful sale of federally protected property." One agent set his voice steady, almost casual. He produced a warrant and a set of handcuffs in the same motion as if this moment had been rehearsed 100 times before. Gasps ricocheted around the table. Owen's mother clutched her pearls so hard, the string threatened to snap. His father rose halfway from his chair, stammering, "There must be some mistake. Our son." The agent cut him off. "No mistake. The forged documents bear his signature. The wire transfers trace back to his accounts. The cabin sold under fraudulent pretenses sits adjacent to restricted land. That makes it federal." I sat perfectly still, my cheek still hot. From the slap, my hands folded in my lap. For once, all eyes weren't on me, to stay silent or take the blame. All eyes were on Owen. He laughed at first, a brittle cracking sound. "This is absurd. She's my wife. Her property is my property. You can't arrest me for selling what's mine." The second agent stepped closer, voice like steel. "That's not how federal law works, sir. And forging a spouse's signature is still forgery. You'll have the chance to explain yourself in court." The cuffs snapped shut around his wrists. The sound was crisp, final, louder in my ears than the slap had been. For the first time in years, I saw Owen's confidence falter. His jaw clenched, his shoulders heaved, but the swagger was gone. "Laura," he hissed, turning toward me as the agents pulled him back. His eyes burned with fury. "You did this. You think you've won. You'll regret this." I met his gaze, blood still on my lip, and said softly, "No, Owen, I refuse to regret finally being free." The words seemed to suck the air from the room. His parents gaped. His sister covered her mouth. The cousins stared as if they'd just seen the script of their lives rewritten in real time. The agents guided him toward the door. His mother wailed, lunging after them. "Please, he's fragile. He's under stress. This is a misunderstanding." Her pleas bounced off their backs like pebbles against armor. As Owen was marched out, the golden light of the chandelier flickered across his bowed head and the steel glint of the cuffs. Outside, the hum of engines grew louder. Black SUVs, waiting with their doors open, headlights cutting through the night. The agents paused long enough for one to hand me a copy of the warrant. "You'll be contacted by the prosecutor's office. Thank you for your cooperation, ma'am." I took it with steady hands, though my pulse thundered in my ears. "Thank you," I whispered. When the door slammed shut behind them, the room erupted, not with applause this time, but with chaos. His father's fists pounded the table. "What have you done? You've destroyed this family." His mother sobbed, "Laura, how could you call them? He needed your support, not betrayal." I rose slowly, the weight of their accusations rolling off me like water on glass. My cheek was swollen, my lips split, but my spine was straight. He forged my name. He hit me. He sold what was mine. And you cheered him for it. Don't you dare call this my betrayal. Tonight you saw the truth. The words hung heavy, undeniable. For the first time, their silence wasn't mine to bear. It was theirs. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished oak and old dust. The kind of space where thousands of verdicts had been carved into history. I sat on the witness bench, my palms pressed against the cool grain of the railing, as Owen was led inside in an orange jumpsuit. The sight of him without his tailored suits, his wrists chained, his arrogance swallowed into the folds of county-issued fabric. It was almost surreal. His parents sat behind him, dressed in their finest, still clinging to the illusion of control. His mother dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. His father scowled at me as though his glare alone could bend the law. I felt their hatred, but it slid off me like oil on water. Today was not about them. The prosecutor stood tall, his voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling. "Your Honor, the defendant. Owen Bennett is charged with wire fraud, forgery, and the unlawful sale of federally protected property. The evidence will show a deliberate scheme to enrich himself at the expense of his wife, and in violation of federal law." Stacks of documents were brought forward. The deed transfer with my forged signature, bank records, tracing the money, phone logs, even his own recorded boasts about selling Laura's little cabin. Each piece was a nail hammered into the coffin of his defense. Owen's lawyer tried to paint a different picture. "Your Honor, this was a marital misunderstanding. Husbands and wives share property. My client acted in good faith, believing he had the authority." The judge cut him off with a raised hand. "Forgery is not good faith. Fraud is not a misunderstanding. Do not insult this court." When it was my turn to testify, I rose on shaky legs, but my voice carried clear. I described how I had discovered the papers, how Owen had admitted to me how he had humiliated me in front of his family. I showed the bruises, submitted the photos, played the audio, where he sneered that everything I owned belonged to him. The room grew still. For the first time, Owen looked cornered. His eyes darted, his jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He couldn't. The evidence never blinked. Leah, seated near the front, gave me the smallest nod, a silent reminder of the path that had led here. All the nights of silence, of documenting, of enduring it, had built to this moment. After days of testimony, the jury returned swiftly. Guilty on all counts. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Owen Bennett, you are sentenced to 8 years in federal prison with restitution to be paid in full to your wife, Laura Bennett. You are further barred from accessing or managing her assets now and in the future. 8 years, the words settled over me like a balm. Not just punishment, but freedom. As the bailiffs moved to take him away, Owen finally snapped. He twisted toward me, his voice raw and venomous. You ruined me. Do you hear me, Laura? Without me, you're nothing. I didn't rise. I didn't shout. I simply met his eyes, steady and unbroken, and said I was always something. You just never saw it. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. His parents stood, their faces ashen, but no one stopped the bailiffs from dragging Owen through the double doors. His fury echoed until the heavy wood closed behind him, and then silence. A silence that wasn't suffocating anymore. It was liberating. I stepped out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight, Leah at my side. The air smelled sweeter than I remembered. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that marriage years ago, silenced and small. I had faced him, faced them all, and the law had stood with me. The cabin was still mine. My freedom was still mine. And for the first time in a long time, my future was mine too. The verdict might have ended Owen's trial, but it ignited a new war outside the courtroom. The Bennetts were not the kind of family to accept disgrace quietly. The very next morning, I woke to my phone buzzing relentlessly. Dozens of notifications, messages, tags, screenshots. Owen's sister had taken to Facebook her post. Dripping with venom, some women can't survive without destroying their husbands. Laura wasn't strong enough to stand by Owen, so she called the feds. Now he's rotting in prison because of her spite. Shame on her. The post spread like wildfire. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years chimed in with comments calling me greedy, manipulative, vindictive. Neighbors shared whispers at the grocery store. Even parents of my students sent veiled emails questioning if I was stable enough to keep teaching. It should have crushed me. For a moment it nearly did. But Leah's words rang in my ears. Facts outlive lies. Let the storm pass. Don't swing wildly, hold your ground. So I stayed silent. Instead of firing back on social media, I gave Leah the evidence she needed. She leaked select documents to the press. The forged deed, the wire transfers, the bruises cataloged with dates. Local papers ran the story. Teacher's husband jailed for federal fraud, forged wife's signature on protected property. Suddenly the tide shifted. Strangers reached out with support. Parents wrote letters praising my resilience. A survivors group in Boston invited me to speak. What the Bennetts had framed as a betrayal was exposed for what it was: justice. The family doubled down. At a church potluck, Owen's mother cornered me. Her voice low and sharp. Do you enjoy ruining us, Laura? Do you enjoy watching this family suffer? I met her glare with calm steel. I didn't ruin your family. Owen did. You just refused to see it. She gasped as though my words were more offensive than her son's crimes. But she didn't follow me when I walked away. For the first time, I had the power to end the conversation, not her. Meanwhile, Owen wrote letters from prison. Pages of them arrived at my mailbox, each more unhinged than the last. Pleas for forgiveness, threats, declarations that he'd rebuild everything when he got out. I saved them all unopened, sealed in a folder marked evidence. Leah advised me to keep them just in case. The backlash wasn't only emotional. Owen's family tried to challenge the restitution order, claiming the cabin sale had been family business and that they were entitled to part of the money. The judge dismissed their motion within minutes, citing the mountain of proof that the cabin was mine alone. Watching their faces as the gavel came down was a second verdict I savored. Still, the attacks left scars. My name was dragged through whispers and posts, my every move scrutinized. But something remarkable happened in the midst of it all. People I'd barely known began stepping forward. Former students sent notes. Neighbors invited me for coffee. Survivors of abuse emailed me stories of their own, thanking me for not staying silent. It was then I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was part of something larger. My silence, once a cage, had become a banner. The fallout burned hot for weeks, then slowly cooled. Owen's parents stopped attending church. His sister deleted her Facebook account. The Bennett's name, once polished with small-town prestige, was now synonymous with scandal. Their attempts to smear me only spotlighted their own denial. One evening, standing on the porch of my cabin with autumn leaves drifting around me, I breathed deep. The air was crisp, clean, untouched by the lies and noise. Leah's words came back. Facts outlive lies. And I finally believed her. The facts had freed me, and the Bennetts, for all their noise, had only imprisoned themselves in shame. The first morning I woke up at the cabin after the trial. The silence was different. Not the suffocating silence of Owen's shadow. Not the tense quiet of dinners where I had to swallow every word, but a clean, open silence. The kind that let me hear the wind through the trees, the drip of dew from the eaves, the distant call of a loon on the lake. I brewed coffee on the old gas stove and carried the mug to the porch. For years I had pictured this moment, but I had never dared to believe it would arrive. My cabin, the one I had saved fought for almost lost, was truly mine again. No forged signatures, no laughter over my little shack, no fear of it slipping away. At school, the transition wasn't easy. Whispers lingered in the halls. A handful of parents withdrew their children, but most of my students clung to me tighter than ever. They left notes on my desk. "We're proud of you, Ms. Bennett." The principal, once cautious, began sending me to conferences and workshops, holding me up as an example of resilience. Teaching, which had felt like a burden under Owen's criticism, became my anchor again. Leah stayed by my side through it all. Some nights we sat at the kitchen table in the cabin's stacks of documents, still spread out, though now they were less about defense and more about restoration. She helped me file paperwork to strip Owen's name from joint accounts, to secure a restraining order against him even from prison, to change the locks and titles on everything he had once touched. Each notarized signature felt like another chain cut loose. The healing wasn't just legal, it was personal. For the first time in a decade, I went to therapy. I sat in a small, sunlit room with a kind woman named Dr. Hughes and unspooled the years, the gaslighting, the isolation, the bruises explained away as accidents. Saying it aloud was harder than I expected, but also freeing. Dr. Hughes reminded me that healing wasn't about erasing the scars. It was about learning I was never defined by them. I joined a survivors support group, women of all ages, sitting in a circle in a church basement, pouring out stories that mirrored my own. We laughed, we cried, we held each other's hands. For the first time, I didn't feel like the only one carrying invisible weight. And the cabin, oh, the cabin blossomed with me. I painted the shutters, a cheerful green, planted wildflowers along the porch, filled the inside with books and photographs I had been too afraid to hang before. I hosted the support group there one weekend, and the women marveled at the view of the lake. One of them said softly, "It feels like freedom lives here." I couldn't have described it better. I even started writing again. Journals at first, then essays, then a small blog. To my surprise, people read them. Strangers left comments thanking me for telling the truth. A nonprofit for survivors reached out, asking if I would speak at their conference. Standing at that podium months later, looking out at a room of women who had walked through fire and still stood tall, I realized I had found something Owen could never take purpose. Some nights I still woke from dreams of the slap, the laughter, the humiliation. Healing wasn't a straight line, but each time I walked to the porch, breathed in the night air, and remembered I wasn't in that dining room anymore. I wasn't trapped. The last letter from Owen arrived in spring. I didn't open it. I handed it straight to Leah, who slid it into the evidence folder without comment. Whatever words he had left weren't mine to carry. As the seasons turned, so did I. From fear to freedom, from silence to voice, from survival to living. The cabin was no longer just a refuge. It was the foundation of the life I was finally building. Brick by brick, truth by truth. And for the first time in years, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a woman broken by betrayal. I saw a woman rebuilding stronger than she had ever been. Summer sunlight poured across the cabin porch like liquid gold. I leaned against the railing barefoot, my coffee steaming in hand. The lake shimmered its ripples, catching the light. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of someone else's voice in my ear telling me I was less. This place had once been my secret refuge, hidden from Owen's control, dismissed by his family as a silly little hobby shack. Now it was my home, my sanctuary, my proof that their judgment had never defined me. I thought about everything that had happened, the slap, the laughter, the handcuffs, the courtroom. The betrayal had cut deep, but what came after carved out something stronger. I had survived, I had rebuilt, and I was no longer afraid of being loud about it. When the local paper asked me to share my story, I said yes. When the nonprofit invited me to lead a workshop, I said yes. When the support group asked if they could meet here every other month, I said yes. Each yes was a brick in the foundation of my new life, one I chose for myself. Leah joked one evening as we grilled burgers on the porch. "This place isn't just a cabin anymore, it's a headquarters." She was right. From this porch, I wrote letters to lawmakers about stronger protections for survivors. From this porch, I hosted Zoom calls with women across the country who needed to know they weren't alone. From this porch, I began sketching out plans for something I called Quiet Strength, a nonprofit dedicated to giving women the legal and emotional tools I had fought so hard to find. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about Owen. It was about redefining what family meant. Family wasn't the people who cheered when I was slapped. Family wasn't the ones who whispered lies online. Family was the women who sat in my living room sharing survival stories, the students who wrote thank you notes in shaky cursive, the friends like Leah who refused to let me fall. Healing had given me clarity. I didn't owe loyalty to those who hurt me just because we shared a last name or a bloodline. Family could be chosen, and I was choosing mine. One crisp morning, as autumn painted the trees red and gold, I stood at the edge of the dock and let the chill water lap at my toes. For years I had felt trapped by Owen's grip, by his family's silence, by the fear of what would happen if I fought back. But looking out at the wide lake, I realized the truth. Freedom had always been waiting, I just had to claim it. And so I did. Owen still writes from prison or so, Leah tells me. I don't read the letters. His words no longer matter. His power is gone, replaced by accountability, by the hard walls of justice. He chose his path, and I've chosen mine. If you asked me today what the cabin means, I'd say it's proof that even when people laugh at your dreams, even when they strip away your voice, even when they slap you in front of everyone, you can rise, you can build something that lasts. So to anyone listening, maybe you've been silenced, maybe you've been betrayed, maybe your own family has called you worthless. I want you to hear me. You are not defined by what they say. You are not trapped by their choices. Evidence never blinks truth, never dies, and freedom is worth fighting for. My name is Laura Bennett. I was betrayed, humiliated, and nearly erased. But I stood back up. I claimed my life, and I found my family in the ones who believed in me. Now I sit here on my porch, the air cool, the leaves dancing, the water reflecting the sky. And I know this is not the end of my story. It's the beginning. And if you've ever felt like I did, broken, dismissed, silenced, let this be a reminder your story isn't over either.